This is interesting because we're doing back-to-back psychological sci-fi films from
Yes,
Solaris to Primer.
yes. This was supposed to be a bit of a break, a bit of an easier movie, perhaps, but it's actually pretty complicated.
It's easier based on length. It's about half the length, if not a little bit
Uh,
shorter than half, no?
it
Than
is. It is.
yeah, than
Yeah, it is.
Solaris.
It's definitely shorter, but it's fairly dense, though. There's a lot going on in it.
People would say Solaris is very dense.
Well, that's true. That's true as well.
But this was good and it was interesting. It makes it seem like we're big fans of psychological sci-fi.
Yes, and I guess we kind of are in a way. I mean, I enjoyed this movie. I enjoyed Solaris a lot. Yeah, so I'm glad to have seen this. It's funny, I'd never heard of it before.
Yeah, I mean, I heard of this when it got some buzz. Eventually saw it once. I thought it was interesting and thought maybe this would be a great opportunity to revisit it. Um,
Yeah,
I guess the main thing that has people talking about this film and made this film stand out is trying to decipher time travel. It seems kind
yes.
of simple, but maybe that's just because I don't get it, so it seems simple to me. Uh, but there's a line in here where they're talking about how much NASA spent on trying to figure out how to write with a pen in space, and he said they eventually just use a pencil. So it's like you can make
Yes,
something way more complicated than it needs to be. Uh,
yes.
I think basically they created a time loop, and
Hmm.
instead of going into the machine, when it goes forward in time, they just let the machine run. Then they go in as the machine goes backwards, so they're only part of that loop. So
Hmm.
when they go backwards, the other versions of themselves is waiting in the hotel room in the real time. And as long as they don't make contact, as the day plays out for the second time, the originals go into the machine closing the loop. And then there's only one of them in the timeline, the ones that were hiding out in the hotel originally. I think I explained that clearly, and I think that's basically what happens, or am I wrong?
Well, I think that's not a bad explanation. I think yeah, it's hard to kind of get my head around this exactly, but it does seem like yes, they've accidentally created a time loop, as you said. They weren't trying to do that, and yeah, it's like they get in the box. Or no, they start the box. Sorry, they
If
turn
they
the
got
box
in the
on.
box, they'd be going into the loop.
Yes,
So
yes.
instead of looping,
And
they start the machine,
they start
right?
the machine. Yes,
And the prime ones, the originals, they go somewhere where they're isolated. They want
yes,
to isolate themselves because of causality, cause and effect. And if they interact with something, it's going to end up kind of messing up the timeline.
yes,
So they isolate themselves so they don't do anything that would interfere with actual anything actually going on in the timeline. So they
yes,
go to a hotel.
yes,
As time plays out, they make an excuse as to why they can't interact, to call out sick, whatever. So as the machine is going forward in time and they're playing out time in real time, isolated, then when the machine is time to go backwards in time to then complete the loop, then they go into the machine. And then they get to go back to the past. And instead of being in the hotel room, they're now playing out in real time. But while in the hotel room, they follow stocks and different things like that. And now that they get to play out the day a second time, instead of being isolated in the hotel, they're now free to interact with the rest of the world because the versions of themselves that they would have been interacting with is isolated in real time in the hotel. I think that is that essentially what happens?
I think so. I think They start the machine and they set the timer for 15 minutes. And this is to give them a chance to get away because they don't want to cross paths with themselves. So I think essentially they set the timer for 15 minutes, and then in 15 minutes, they come out of this machine, even though that they are actually driving to this other town at that point. So it's like there's two different sets of characters that are existing simultaneously in reality for about 6 hours. And the set that comes out of the box presumably goes to work,
The
does
set that
whatever
comes
they.
out of the box were in the hotel room,
Exactly, yeah.
as the ones that drive
Yeah,
off go to the hotel room.
that's right. So they have to go to the hotel room and then wait for 6 hours to get back in the box. Whereas, in fact, they've actually come out of the box 15 minutes after they left. And so there's kind of the two sets of them now in the real world, which is kind of mind boggling. Um, because is it really two different sets of people, or is it just the same people existing?
Well, as long as they don't leave the hotel room, the time loop closes and then it just resets to just one version. There are two
Right.
versions for a period of time, but once the loop closes, it then goes back to one version.
Yes.
But
But I think,
obviously, if they leave the hotel room, then there becomes multiple versions.
yes.
So
Wow.
I don't know. To me, it seems fairly simple because there is internal logic to what's going on. I mean, even if you don't get it, you can rewatch it until you get it because there is internal logic. And I think a problem with some of these movies, speaking of Marvel, even the Marvel movies, when they did time travel, they did the typical Marvel thing where it's just they cut in jokes and quips and it's like, oh, is this like Back to the Future logic or like this logic or that logic? And
Right.
it takes you out of it because they make fun of what they're doing. So hey, we're not taking this serious, neither should you. It's just silly fun. I prefer a movie like this where they just say, we'll take it serious, we'll have internal logic. Obviously, this isn't real, but as long as we keep the internal logic, then you can follow the story, try to figure out what's going on, and just follow it as a story. It doesn't have to be reality. It's not like a good movie has to be like a biography. It could all be fiction as long as it makes internal sense and it's entertaining.
True. And I think the filmmaker, one of his goals was to
Shane
not
Carruth,
dumb.
I believe.
Yes, to not dumb this down so that the audience would be able to understand it easily, because I think he had a background in science or engineering or something like that, and he wanted to sort of retain all the jargon, the language that these guys use, and he didn't want to make it easy to follow. And I think he succeeded. I think it's especially off the top of the movie. They're talking about stuff, and I don't know what they're talking about half the time. I just get the general sense that, oh, they're working on something, and they're trying to do something, and maybe they've succeeded at doing something that they didn't quite mean to do. But it's without knowing, without having a background in science or engineering or something like that, it is very difficult to sort of follow in a way, but you follow it in a more general way. And I think once the story kicks in, it becomes more gripping and more interesting, because, interesting things are happening. But I think right off the top, it's kind of like, well, I don't know what these guys are talking about. What did you think about that?
Yeah, I won't pretend to know what they're talking about. I can follow the logic of this story. I'm saying the logic is easier to follow, but as far
Yeah,
as the jargon and things like that, no, I can't follow it. I do
yeah.
like the fact that he didn't feel a need to dumb it down, that he didn't have to put in quips
Mhm.
and jokes and showed like draw charts. And I think it was Event Horizon and James Cameron movie as well. Now I'm gonna forget the James Cameron movie, but James Cameron also did like a movie, like a space movie as well, where they're talking about time travel and things like that. And they both
Uh-huh.
do the thing where they bend the paper and they put a pencil through it and say, "Oh, this is how you loop time and stuff." They didn't need to show like visual, like things and simplified and they just said, they said the technical jargon. They mixed in the technical jargon with enough Well, if you put enough technical jargon that sounds like it makes sense, which probably does make sense, by the time you get into the parts that are fantasy, people just go with it anyway. You know, there's a certain amount of internal logic because there's a basis of truth because he does have scientific engineering background to a certain level. So there's a certain baseline level of, okay, this is where this theoretically could start from. And he just keeps that consistent and doesn't feel a need to say, hey, like, well, it's kind of like Back to the Future, but different, you know? I like the fact that he didn't go in that direction. It's kind of humorless from that standpoint, which is fine with me. It's interesting enough. I think one of the critiques of the film, speaking of that, is that there wasn't more humor, more standard plot points. But for a first-time filmmaker, some of that in the script is missing, but that also makes it different from everything else and makes it more interesting.
Yeah, and I think he did a great job. I mean, again, I don't pretend to follow everything that's in here, but I think that he did a great job of putting this together. And somebody compared it to a puzzle. You know, it's almost like a puzzle that you have to decipher because there's a lot of different timelines going on. As you said, there's different versions of the characters and different moments. And, you know, the first time through, I didn't get everything. I still enjoyed it, but I didn't understand every moment. Sitting through it a second time, I was able to recognize things and go, oh, yeah, that's what happened here. And that's what they're referring to there. I still don't think I got everything. I think I'd probably need to sit through it a third time or maybe a fourth time. I would probably still be noticing things that I didn't notice the first time or the second time. But I believe it's all there. I believe he's done a great job of putting it all together. And if you were able to pull it apart, you'd be able to see that, oh, yeah, all these parts do fit together.
Yeah, it's interesting for a first-time filmmaker. Say what you want about the script and the dialogue, but I think he did a great job for a first-time filmmaker. He shot one for one, which can turn out to be an Ed Wood movie or a Doris Wishman movie, but it turned out to be a pretty good movie. I think the budget was around 10 grand, which again could end up, and there have been movies that cost this little that have been successful, just as successful, even more successful, and even less successful. So a few examples would be, I would guess that a Blair Witch, I don't know the exact budget, maybe in that range. There's a Paranormal Activity that we already reviewed on this channel, I guess would be around that range if I had to guess. And I don't know what the budget is for something like the original Evil Dead or Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Who knows, maybe a lot more, maybe a little bit less, but I would think somewhere in the ballpark, all those are low budget movies. You know, a lot of them were even more successful than this, but I think with those and with this, it shows that you don't need a ton of money as long as you have an interesting idea and good execution. You can have a really good movie that can compete with movies that have giant budgets, which is one of my favorite lines in the film, where he talks about, you know, NASA spending all that money to create this pen and they just did it with a pencil, kind of like how he did this movie. It's like, you know, he did it with a pencil. He didn't need some super expensive pen. And I thought it was pretty interesting. There was one movie that cost around this amount of money that wasn't as successful. It's a little movie called Mandingo Sex Addict by yours truly, where I had about 10 grand, and instead of, you know, being creative with different things, I spent it on a bunch of pretty women and did a erotic film, and bought a bunch of equipment that I didn't even end up using. But it shows you, like, you know, 10 grand can go a lot of different ways, and you can do a lot of different interesting things with it. So
Oh, for sure. And this movie, I believe, was a success at the Sundance Film Festival. Is that right? And then it got some sort of distribution, and I think it made over $500,000 in its initial release, which is really great. If it only cost $7,000 or $10,000 to make, that's a huge profit. But of course, mainstream Hollywood doesn't necessarily even consider that to be real money. You know, somebody once said to me, If you want to have a career in Hollywood, you're better off to direct $100 million movie that loses money than a $1 million movie that makes money, because they're more impressed by the fact that you made $100 million movie, which I think is insane. I think they should make more movies that cost $10,000 or $1 million. And if it only makes $1 million or $2 million, that's great. But as soon as you make $100 million movie, you can't. It's almost impossible to make that money back. It's ridiculous.
Mhm.
But it's interesting though. This movie, like, I didn't know about it. I didn't hear about it until you mentioned it last week. So it hasn't sort of become like Blair Witch Project or something like that, where it was really kind of a mainstream phenomenon. It did well. It made money, and certainly got a lot of critical acclaim. But I'm not sure why it hasn't reached a bigger audience, because it is a good movie. Um, and the director, it looks like he hasn't gone on to do very much since then. I think he's only made maybe one other movie as a writer director, and maybe produced a third one. Do you know anything about that?
No, so he hasn't gone on to do a lot, but you can say the same thing about the director who did Paranormal Activity. He didn't go on to do a lot. I mean, sometimes with a movie like this, it could even be with musicians. Sometimes you have one thing to say. You got one shot to say your story, blow your load. And see, I went there, blow your load, bring it back to Mandingo Sex Addict. See how I created my little
I,
loop there. I brought
that's
it all
that's right.
together, just like
It's not
Primer.
not quite a time loop, but something. Yes, yes,
Yes.
I got it.
So I think sometimes you have a story to tell. You have a story to tell, and you tell your story, and that's pretty much it. And some filmmakers, some musicians, some artists, they just retell that same story over and over again, and with little variations of it. But sometimes you just have the one opportunity to tell your story, and that's pretty much it. I think the same thing, like I said, with the Paranormal Activity director, he didn't go on to do a lot more. Um, and this gives you an opportunity, a spotlight, when your one story hits really big. Um, and sometimes you don't have any more stories to tell in you, or the variations of your story aren't different enough, or don't hit quite the same way, and that's kind of it for you. It doesn't mean you're bad. It just means that, you were passionate about something, people saw that passion, they connected with it, and that's pretty much it. But you have a ton of filmmakers that essentially you look at their filmography and it's all variations of the same movie. They stay in the same genre. It's just, it's a different psycho killer, but it's still some killer killing a bunch of people. Or, Quentin Tarantino would be an example. A lot of his movies are variations of the same thing. None of the characters talk the way normal people talk. They talk the way Quentin Tarantino talks. If you see an interview, he's talking about all these old movies, and he's talking all fast and rapid, like he just did like a 8 ball of coke. And then you see the characters in his films. They're either like young models or big movie stars, and they all talk like him. And it's like, I don't believe any of you have watched any of those movies that you're talking about. I believe the director who gave you those lines did. But sometimes the variations of your story are good enough to keep a career going or filmography going, but sometimes it's not. I don't view it as a bad thing that he hasn't done a ton of stuff. I view it as a good thing that his one story that he had to tell, like, really transcended, and, like you said, made a lot more than what it cost, and build a name for himself.
Yeah, well, that's true. Some people only do have one thing to say, and some people are comfortable with that. I know he has gone on to work on some other things, and like I said, I think he had at least one other film come out. So hopefully he will do some more. And I don't know if his second film was a lot like this or if it was really different. I don't know. I haven't seen it. But
I
anyway,
heard it was
certainly,
as dense as this, like as tough to follow as this, but I haven't watched it or did any other follow up besides hearing a little bit about it.
yeah, well, that would make sense, I guess. That could be his personal style. Dense, not dumbing it down,
Mhm.
keeping in all the jargon.
Yeah, and again, maybe he did something just as dense, but the time travel thing is more interesting to people than whatever the other dense movie he did. They can look at, man, this is dense and interesting, or this is just dense and I give up.
Yeah.
I'll pass. So, but again, for a first-time filmmaker, I mean, he shot one for one, did a great job with that. Interesting that he decided, hey, I'm gonna stick with this dialogue, and you either follow it or you don't. And if you like, you find it interesting, and I hook you, you're gonna watch it like three, four, multiple times. You know, you're gonna keep watching it. And I think that's what he did. He has a movie that didn't appeal to a lot of people, but the people it did appeal to are probably willing to watch it multiple times, own copies of it, and he got like a little cult following with this movie, and that's the reason I heard of it, because of the cult following. Um, I thought another thing interesting for a first-time filmmaker is it was a good um, shot composition in this. There were some interesting shots. I was like, man, this is a pretty creative shot for someone who's never done this before. I thought the shot list was really good. The only thing I can knock on it that was a little amateurish was there's a lot of out of focus shots that I think weren't intentionally out of focus. But as far as the look of the film, leaving out the out of focus shots, the shot composition I thought was pretty creative considering the limited locations and things like that. He found a creative way to shoot it, considering most of the movies was just a couple of, late 20s, early 30s guys in suits just having conversations.
Yeah. No, I thought it looked great. I didn't think it looked like a no budget film. I thought it looked good. It looked like it needed to look, guys working in a garage, low budget inventors or whatever you want to call them, working on stuff in a garage. It all looked totally appropriate. Sitting in a hotel room, you know, it was low budget, but it didn't look painfully low budget. It just looked like it should.
Another film that we reviewed that is an all-time classic, one of my favorite films of all time, uh, All About Eve. An incredible movie, but I would say this looked better than All About Eve because they just went with very standard shots, a very boring looking film. So sometimes it shows that like budget has nothing to do with creativity. Again, not a knock on All About Eve. It's just bringing it up to, praise this one. Sometimes, people, they don't view value in certain aspects of filmmaking. It's just like, all right, I'm just going to tell my story. I won't get wrapped up in trying to make it look creative. I don't think this movie got too wrapped up in trying to be creative, but it made it visually interesting because again, it's just people having conversations. You can say sci-fi this, you can say interesting that, you can say multiples and doubles and all this other stuff, but there was no budget there. The creativity was all in the dialogue. It's not like we saw them on screen at the same time, any of the doubles. We just saw them looking from a distance. There wasn't anything as far as like visual effects that made you say, oh my gosh, there are three of them. No, they say there are multiple of them, and we just buy it because we get wrapped up in the story and the dialogue and following what's going along. But visually it doesn't surely show you anything besides they have a conversation here, they have a conversation there, they're sitting in a hotel, they're sitting in a living room. Again, the shots weren't like something you'd see in an Orson Welles movie, but it did distract you enough that you didn't just say, hey, this is just a bunch of people sitting around talking.
Yeah, for sure. And you could say that there were certain scenes in the movie that perhaps they didn't show. Scenes that we heard about that could have been sort of big budget scenes. They could have been difficult scenes to shoot, and they chose not to shoot them, perhaps because they would have been too expensive. But it actually created more of a sense of mystery and of the unknown to not actually see what happened in some of these instances. And it certainly left me intrigued and wondering, okay, what actually did go on there? For example, this party where supposedly an ex-boyfriend of Rachel, the girlfriend of the one character, he showed up with a shotgun. Yeah, and he was threatening people with a shotgun, and so they did something to foil him, but they don't really show it, right? They don't show that scene happen, and the way they talk about it, it's almost like it didn't quite go down the way it was supposed to. And I'm not really clear on what actually happened there, but it's just one of the many intriguing things that is in this movie that we don't fully understand, I think.
Yeah, I think who knows why they didn't show it, but for me, I think the emphasis wasn't on how it actually played out. I think the emphasis was on the vanity of saying, hey, like, let's create this moment where I get to play hero, and the danger of it, and the moral implications of it, and the effects it would have on the characters, and how many characters, breaking the timeline, the risk reward. I think it was all about the execution of it, why they're doing it, the implications of it, than how it actually plays out. We know why it plays out, and that's the important part. It's like, hey, we get to, come in and play hero, and it's like, all right, I'm going to justify why we need to do this. I'm going to tell you why it's not worth it. I mean, I think that was the focus of it more so than how watching it play out for like an action scene or something. Oh my God, look at that great, he flipped the gun and he knocked him out. I don't think they were trying to create a John Wick moment. I think it was just all
No.
about the psychological aspect of it. So not showing it, I don't think really, for my viewing, it didn't really matter. I didn't think, in my mind, I wasn't thinking, oh, they couldn't afford to shoot it. I was thinking it wasn't about how the actual scene plays out.
Yeah, well, I think it's better because they didn't show it. But it's interesting because they make reference to the fact that they may have done it several times. Like they say something like, "How many times did Aaron cycle through until he got it right?" So is it kind of like Groundhog Day, where they keep on repeating the same party over and over again until, oh look, we got it, we got this right, But then they also go on to say, um, you know, I decided to believe that only one more would have done it. I can almost sleep at night if there was only one more. So I'm not sure what the implication is, that it didn't quite go down as it was supposed to, and maybe if they had done it one more time, they would have done it right. I don't know. I'm not too clear on what that means because we didn't see it, but it's kind of weird and it's kind of creepy. There's something about that moment. Did you
Well,
have any thoughts?
I thought it was just about bringing that up. Like, imagine you in this position. Like, how many times would you go back to get this perfect moment? And it's
Right.
about the psychological state of that character, that he'd be willing to relive this moment over and over again, just so he can have the glory or the satisfaction of looking in the newspaper and seeing that he did this, or being praised as a hero. I think it's just more about like where the journey that this replicant has gone through to get to that end scene where you see that he's now this Kang the Conqueror overseas building a giant time machine. So I think
Yes.
it's more about the psychological aspect of it, to saying, how many times would you go through this to get the perfect moment? How many times did he go? He could have done it one time. He could have done it 100 times. I think just asking the question is more interesting than knowing the answer to the question.
Yes, for sure. And again, it leaves a feeling of, because at this point in the movie, things are kind of going a little bit wrong for them. Things are getting a little darker, and it sort of leaves some space there to think, ooh, what exactly went down there, and how dark was it? Whatever happened there. Um, so yeah, I kind of like that they don't give us the answer to that.
Yeah, I think a lot of the more interesting things about this film is situations like that, where there is no answer. There's just questions. And again, not to compare this to Solaris, which is one of the greatest movies I've ever seen, but much like Solaris, Solaris, where the philosophy, they just bring up a lot of philosophical questions about humanity and what does it mean to be alive, et cetera, et cetera. Here, they bring up a lot of interesting things, like with the cell phone. Like, the cell phone's ringing. He brought the cell phone with him, and now there are two cell phones, not just to him, but two cell phones,
Yes.
because he took it with him. Now, are they both ringing? Is his ringing? Is the replicant's ringing? If he answers it, how does that affect the timeline? How does that affect causality? That's interesting. And again, they don't
Yeah.
give you an answer to it, but they bring it up,
No.
and to me, that's interesting. And also, you
Yeah.
have the Granger thing, where it's like, who told Granger about the machine? Did Granger follow them and see
Yes.
it? Did one of them tell him? Did a replicant of one of them tell him? Did one version of one of them tell him? Is a
Yeah.
current version of one of them tell him? Or did he just find out on his own? And there's no answer to that. And even in the director
No.
commentary, he mentions, since they don't know, I don't have to know. It's just something that's out there.
Yeah. No, and that's great, because you can see that they're both kind of worried about this. Like, they don't know. Did I tell them? I don't know. I'm not sure. Would I do that? What if there was an emergency? I don't know. What would have had to happen? And so, yeah, there's just such uncertainty there, which is kind of creepy, and it's kind of disturbing. And that whole moment sort of happens just as they're considering doing something that might be foolish. And this sort of is something I noticed about the movie, is as it goes deeper and deeper, they talk about things that they could do, and they say, oh, no, we better not do that, because they might be monkeying with things that are going to change things. And and it kind of reminds me of like a film noir or something, where they're planning a heist. Well, we're going to do this, we're going to do this thing with the shotgun at the party, we're going to rescue the girl, and everything's going to be fine. And I was kind of waiting for it to go bad, the way it would in a noir, like, we're going to pull a heist, but then, oh no, everybody gets shot or whatever. But it doesn't quite happen. They don't quite show that kind of disaster, even though there is something that implies that, yeah, this didn't go down the way it should have. It doesn't quite become that noir disaster, but I kind of was feeling the suspense through the last, I don't know, half hour of the movie, kind of waiting for something to go really, really wrong. And in some ways, it never did.
That's interesting. I didn't feel any of that.
No?
No, none of that. This didn't remind me of noir in any level. No.
Okay,
It reminded me of a
interesting.
psychological sci-fi. That's about it. But hey, people interpret things in different ways. No, this didn't remind. When I think noir, I think crime and double crossing and things like that. I mean, there was there was a lot of intrigue when you found out, like, hey, this earpiece Aaron knew what was going on before Abe came to him. So that brought up some intrigue. And then when you found out it wasn't rats in the basement, it was another Aaron, and they showed you the footage of him, putting the sedative in the milk, that was all intriguing, but I wasn't thinking like crime drama or crime thriller like noirs. I was just thinking more intrigue.
Yeah, well, you could even apply the noir comparison to the
You're not letting this noir thing go, are you?
I'm not letting it go.
I concede. It reminds me exactly of like a noir. Okay, can we move on? You know what this reminds me of? Maltese Falcon, another noir film.
Yes. Well, yeah. No, I was just going to say that, as things kind of get a little bit out of control, in terms of, the guy, Rachel's father, who may have used the machine and is now all messed up, and, things are going wrong, and they're not sure, what's happening. Abe, I guess, decides that he's going to stop all this, right? He's going to go back in time to a point where he can just prevent any of this stuff from happening. And he tries to do that, but then in a noirish twist, it turns out that the other guy's a step ahead of him, right, and has kind of already beaten him to the punch. And so it's kind of like the noirish twist there at the end, although it's not quite the end. But
yeah, there you have it. Our take on the neo-noir classic Primer.
That's right. Sci-fi noir. Why not?
Because it's not.
Primer. We start off in a garage with 4 guys who are dressed in shirts and ties, and they're working on stuff in the garage. There's all kinds of equipment, computers, electronics, and they look pretty dressed up for guys who are just working in a garage. And then we hear a phone ring, and a voice says, "Here's what's going to happen." And the voice kind of proceeds to tell us a bit about these guys and what they're working on, but it's all kind of cryptic. Like, I don't really know exactly what they're talking about. And and we see technical work going on as the voice talks. And again, I don't know exactly what they're doing. It's all kind of mysterious to me. And then they're inside the house and they're talking, and there's a woman working in the background. And the one guy who is Aaron, he wants to try something, but the other guys are not really into it. They're kind of dismissing it. And they mention this Platts, a guy by the name of Platts, and the double talk that we're getting from Platts. And one guy says there are two cases like this at my brother's firm, which kind of makes me wonder if it's a legal thing. Like, did Platts somehow screw them over, or is he cheating them out of something? But again, we don't know. The movie is not really letting us know what the details are here. And later, Aaron and his buddy Abe are alone, and they talk about the other guys, Robert and Philip, who are kind of into their own ideas. And Aaron and Abe don't really care about their idea, and they don't really feel they're necessary to do that idea. And likewise, they don't feel they need those guys to do their ideas. So they're kind of like maybe deciding to work on their own. And we also learn that the woman is the wife of Aaron, and that they have a kid. So then the next day they're back at work, and they're sort of probably working on their own idea. There's a lot more technical stuff going on. I don't really understand it. They do some low budget things, like they take a catalytic converter out of a car and to get some palladium out of it, which they need. And they also pull out a fridge, and they're going to remove copper tubing from the fridge until Aaron says, "Stop, I'll buy the tubing. This isn't saving us any money." So anyway, they finally do an experiment where they put a Weeble inside a metal box, and also a camcorder, and they start it up, and the thing sort of works, and then it stops, and one of them says, "Did we blow something?" "Yes, we did." And so that's kind of a failed experiment. And we're about 13 and a half minutes into the movie at this point. And like I said, I really don't have any idea what they're doing, what they're trying to do. And so this is all, like, it's kind of interesting in a way, but it's all kind of cryptic and mysterious at this point to me. How did you feel at this point?
Obviously the movie's still world building at this point. It's trying to set up different scenarios. So it's so early on in the film, you can't really finger, where this is going and how much you're gonna like it.
Mm-hmm.
To me, the enjoyment of this is just knowing what's coming if you've seen the trailer or read about it. But
Right.
it's pretty much pedestrian at this point. The only thing noticeable is the fact that there's a lot of jargon that they're not
Yes.
attempting, they're not even trying to attempt in any way to make it relatable to you.
Yes, that's true. And so then after that, we sort of fade in, and we find Abe is lying on the floor, unconscious. And the phone rings, and he answers, and Aaron says, "It's 7 at night. Let's get something to eat." And then when they're together, he says, "Do you feel like steak?" And ultimately he says, "No, I'm not paying for steak." And then Aaron kind of gives him a look, and Abe says, "Oh, is it stable?" And he kind of realizes that maybe there's a celebration in order here. And so they get in the truck, and it becomes clear they've accomplished something here. And again, I'm not sure exactly what they're trying to do, but I think it has something to do with maybe trying to decrease the weight of objects, maybe. And the important thing seems to be that the machine they built is now stable, which is good news. And Aaron decides to lie to the other two guys to keep them out of the garage for a couple of days. They don't want them to find out about this potential breakthrough. Abe expresses some concern that Robert and Philip's project is in there too, but Aaron says, "It's my garage. They're not paying rent." So interesting. He doesn't want to include the other two guys in this breakthrough. Um, and basically, they know that they're onto something, but they're not exactly sure what it is. They can imagine lots of potential uses for this thing, but they feel that the worst thing they could do is try to sell this technology before they fully understand it. So they're going to keep it quiet. and they throw parties to try and get interest from possible funders, one of whom turns out to be the father of Aaron's girlfriend. Aaron's girlfriend? Abe's girlfriend.
Abe's, yeah. Aaron's
It's
married.
so easy. Aaron and Abe, those two names, I can turn them around. So
this is something that you're taught not to do, is have similar names or names that start with the same letter. But again, first time filmmaker, Aaron, Abe.
Yes,
definitely
exactly.
Something you stay away from.
Exactly. So so Abe's girlfriend Rachel, her father Thomas Granger, is a potential investor for them, but they slowly start to realize that they are out of their depth, and we're sort of about 20 minutes in now, and again, it's still fairly cryptic. We're not quite sure where this is going. Did you have any thoughts at this point?
Yeah, when we saw Abe passed out on the ground, and then we heard Aaron say, "Hey, let's have steak," and then Abe's like, "Did you get a bakery?" And so those two kind of scenes made you think, okay, this film is going to start getting momentum. Not a lot, because after that, not the scenes that followed that on a typical, conventional script, things would start to pick up a little bit more. That added a little bit more intrigue, and that you knew something was coming, but it wasn't anything immediate. It just kind of meandered a little bit down, and it didn't really go much further, but it let you know something happened. And maybe those moments you might revisit later, and they might be important moments. But initially, they didn't really pick the pace of the script up at all.
No. But it was getting a little more intriguing because they were onto something here. So Abe asks, I guess the next day, Abe asks Aaron to ditch work, and he promises to show him the most important thing that any living organism has ever witnessed. And so he takes his time, and he really kind of tries to demonstrate what he already knows. And so he takes him around and shows him various things, like there was a fungus found inside the machine, which he's been wiping off about every 5 days. But the expert says that that fungus would normally need about 5 years to accumulate to that level. So, something's going on here. And they wind up putting a watch inside the machine, and they run it for, I think, 1 minute. And when they look at the watch afterwards, the watch thinks that 1,334 minutes have gone by. So clearly something is going on here involving time. And they wind up kind of explaining how it works. And again, they talk about the Weeble that they've been putting in the machine. Did you have Weebles when you were a kid?
Weebles wobble, but they don't fall down.
That's right. We had Weebles. Anyway, so they sort of say that the Weeble enters at point A and he exits at point B, but for some reason it's like it's getting caught up in this loop where it's not exiting, but there's a chance it will exit every time, but it takes about 1,300 tries for it to actually exit, and it always exits at the B end. So I think if you put it in at A or if you put it in at B, it always exits at the B end. But one of them theorizes that if it was a thinking person or a thinking thing inside the machine, they could maybe go out of the A end. And so then the other guy says, so wait a minute, you're talking about building something that's big enough for a person, and they need a place that's safe, and they need a place that's climate controlled. And then they reveal that they're sitting right in front of a self-storage building, which is climate controlled, it says on the sign. So Abe is already way ahead. He's already kind of done everything here. He's got it all ready to go. And Abe makes a very sincere speech about how he's not trying to trick Aaron. He's not playing a prank, and Aaron can't, have a big reaction. He can't shout or run around or anything like that. and he gives Aaron binoculars and lets him take a closer look at the storage place. And Aaron sees Abe walking into the storage place. And he says, "Who's that, Abe?" And we're pretty much exactly at half an hour at this point. So, any thoughts here?
Yes, this is where it gets interesting. This is where the sci-fi really pops out. And if you're gonna like this movie, now is where you're gonna start to be really intrigued by it.
Yes.
A more immature person, which I am not, and you're not, would be thinking, well, that B end ends with a J, and that A end ends with an S, and you're going in and out of those out of those two. But getting back focused, because we're fully mature here. Yeah, this is where the movie gets interesting. Obviously, the sci-fi element pops out a little bit more, and you realize, okay, all of this jargon and all of this talk has been leading up to this. And I think it does pay off when he looks into the binoculars and sees Abe there while Abe is talking to him in front of him. And I think the pacing here pays off, because a more fast-paced movie, you're looking for a little bit more pop. The slower you go and the more detailed you are, the less of a pop you need. This philosophy really works well with horror, because if you do a horror movie where nothing's happening, they're talking about things happening, any little thing happens and like, oh my gosh. And that's like how movies, subtle horror movies, or elevated horror movies they call it, can have very few things happen and it can freak people out. A movie that we review that we tend to reference a lot, that I don't enjoy, that is your favorite movie of all time, Paranormal Activity. Nothing happens in that movie for long periods of time, so when the littlest thing happens, it's shocking. So this kind of works in that way as well, where it's like nothing's happening. Then when he looks in those binoculars and sees Abe, again, if this was a faster paced movie, well, you'd be like, oh, that's just a cheap trick. I mean, you know, they just shot it different times. You're cutting away. They're not even on the same screen together. But here you don't have those critiques, because the movie earned that moment. So you don't need it to pop as much, because there was proper build up to it, and it worked very effectively.
Yes, I agree. And yeah, this is where it really does start to get interesting and exciting. And so next we see two vehicles pull up, and Abe and Aaron get out of the vehicles, and they have a conversation about, well, what did you do? Well, I spent the day in a hotel room. What did you do? Oh, I went to work, I guess. And I suppose this is actually taking place after they took the first trip, but actually before the first trip in the linear timeline, if you know what I mean. But we don't kind of understand that yet. And so then we actually see them taking the trip, and Abe instructs Aaron on what to do. You know, we need two cars. Set the timer for 15 minutes, and then we drive to Russell Field in one of the cars. And of course, the reason that they set the timer for 15 minutes is because they don't want to run into themselves coming out of the machine, because they could come out of the machine instantly if they didn't set it for 15 minutes. And then they drive to Russell Field, two cars, because we're going to need a second car when we wind up coming out of this box in 15 minutes. So there's a car here waiting for them. Anyway, so they isolate in the hotel room in Russell Field. They kill time all day, and they look into what stock made the most money that day, because they want to make one good trade. And then they pick up an oxygen tank. They cut the power to the box, cycle down to a tolerable level. They get in after it reaches a comfortable level, but before it shuts off completely. Does it hurt? He asks. Yeah, it does a little. How safe is it? And he says, well, basically there's no way that he can imagine any of this is remotely safe. Do you still want to do it? And so they do it. They get in the box, and we're at about 37 minutes at this point. They spend 6 hours in the machine. He sets an alarm, tries to sleep, but it's hard to breathe. It's claustrophobic. It's kind of a difficult thing to sit in this box for 6 hours. And then we see him get out, and Aaron gets out. He's in a lot of pain. And he basically says that was not a static shock, Abe, because he had told him it would just feel like a static shock. But Abe tells him he got out too soon. So they're back. Yeah, it's now 8:50 on Tuesday morning. Basically, it's just after they originally left in the cars to go to the Russell Field. And so now they're not sure, they can't really turn the box off because the doubles may be somewhere in the box or in the transit, or so what do? We're not sure what would happen if we turn this box off. So he basically says, so they're one use only, which kind of makes me go, what? So they're going to have to build a new box every time they want to do this, and then they're going to have to leave it on. Am I understanding this correctly? So if they did this for 20 days in a row, there'd be 20 boxes that are being housed somewhere. How crazy is that? What do you think?
I didn't get that from it. Maybe I missed
No?
that they had to keep making a new box every time they did it. I thought they just had the two boxes. The box that they're using,
Yeah.
and then the fail-safe box that Abe made that can go back a little bit further.
Yeah, well, I guess they have the two boxes, I think, because they're each in a separate box, right? When they're doing it together, and then there's one, or maybe just one fail-safe box that we find out about. But yeah, the implication here seems to be, so they're one use only. So what do you mean? We're going to have to leave this thing on all the time and then use a different box? It seems a little crazy, and I'm not sure I fully understood that moment. So I don't know. If
that moment may have gone over my head, but I thought they were just two boxes: the box they're using and the fail-safe box that Abe keeps from him until further along in the movie when he brings it up.
Yeah.
This is kind of the expository part of the film where there's a lot of explanation going on. Obviously, that part that you just mentioned went over my head because I didn't really take that from it. But there is one flaw I did find in it. Not to nitpick because a lot of it's over my head, so who am I to pick flaws? But I would think that because they're only going back several hours in time, because they have to go back in real time and they can't go back any further than when the machine was made, that they would have been closer to understanding this than when Abe went back. So I don't think it should have been that much convincing for Aaron to know what was going on, because since he already did the time travel, right, and he can only go back for so long, the fact that he went back, like the progress they should have made, yeah, of course, yeah, we figured this out, like how much longer they timeline wise they should be close to figuring it out by the time Abe comes back to let Aaron in on it, so Aaron should have been like kind of like knowing that this was inevitable. That's the only flaw I found in it, because like they keep emphasizing you can only go back so far. So if you can only go back so far and Abe knows what's going on, Aaron should have been pretty close to knowing that they invented time travel. That's the critique I have.
Yeah, fair enough. So the next part of the movie, I feel that this is where the troubles are starting to arise. They do buy stock, and they double their money or whatever it is, and we see them taking multiple trips, and then Aaron sort of fantasizes about punching Platt in the nose. Platt, you remember, the guy who did something to them. We're not clear on what it was, but maybe he screwed them over on a deal or something.
I think he screwed them over in the business deal. That was the implication.
Yeah, that's what I think too. So he fantasizes about punching him in the nose, And he says, I'd only do it if there was a way that no one would know and that no one would get hurt. You know, do it and then go back in time and tell myself not to do it, kind of thing. And Abe says, we can't do that. And so that's kind of the first hint. And again, this is where I get into the noir kind of aspect where it's like, oh, here's a heist that we're going to pull. We're going to punch this guy in the nose, but it's going to be okay because then we're going to go back and we're going to make sure it doesn't happen. But wait a minute, something's going to go wrong here. You know, something's going to go wrong. I don't think they ever actually do this, but we'll talk a bit more about it later. But it made me wonder if, oh yeah, is this where they're going to go off the rails? Another thing that happens is Aaron starts talking about telling his wife the truth, kind of bringing her into this and letting her know what's going on. And Abe thinks it's a bad idea. Aaron also talks about building a bigger box so more than one person can fit into it. So, you know, Aaron is kind of the wild card here. He's suggesting some things that could be problematic. And Abe is the one going, well, I don't know. He's kind of the voice of reason. And then Abe says that he wants to tell Robert and Philip about this whole thing. And Aaron says, no. You know, I'll give them all the patents we have to everything we've created before this. I'll give them my house. I'll give them my car. But we're not telling them about this. So Abe is really sure about keeping this a secret. And then sort of the last, well, maybe it's not the last, but another thing that happens is that after they take a trip, they discover that Aaron's ear is bleeding. You know, so, you know, again, things are looking a little bit weird here. And then we kind of get the big revelation of Robert and Philip are allowed back into the garage, and they make a comment that Aaron is a hero, and Abe doesn't know what he's talking about, and it turns out it's this party where Rachel's ex-boyfriend came in with a shotgun and tried to kill her, and Aaron did something heroic and was the big hero. And then so later on, Abe is talking to Aaron and going, what the hell, you know, and you know, you can't take risks like this. You can't do this kind of thing. And can't risk the welfare of your wife and child for someone like Rachel. She's practically begs for these kind of things to happen to her, which I find interesting because isn't Rachel his girlfriend? And he's kind of saying, what are you doing? You know, don't be trying to help her. You know, you've got to worry about your own wife and child. You know, Rachel, the hell with her, you know. But Aaron kind of explains that this was the night he found out about the machine and it was all fresh in his mind. And he wasn't going to let this guy get away with this, scaring people with the shotgun. So again, it's a little cryptic because we don't fully know what happened, but Aaron also says he feels things are different now. You know, he can feel it's different, and he thinks that Abe should be able to feel it's different as well. And so here we are at about 51 minutes into the movie, and I feel there's a lot of hints here of things that could go wrong, things that could go off the rails. How are you feeling at this point?
A few interesting things happen in this section of the film. One of them that stands out to me is telling the wife. So obviously Abe isn't married, but I always think of the Godfather scene where Al Pacino's character tells his sister, I'll allow you to ask me this one time, you know. Then he lies to her, and then the door closes. That's the only reason the mob worked, is you didn't tell your wife, you know. They'll eventually understand that this money is coming from a bad place, but I'd rather have the money and play dumb and than to not have the money and or just ask a bunch of questions. You know, you just kind of eventually your partner will accept the situation, you know, and they'll enjoy the money and they'll enjoy the lifestyle and they'll accept it. But you keep your mouth shut, you know. It's like, cuss your no, but you got to keep your mouth shut. And the other interesting part is the stuff where Abe says, hey, she kind of asked for this stuff. It's like, it's strangely misogynistic. And it just reminded me, like, you know, you can get away with this stuff with low budget movies, but part of the thing that, you can knock big budget movies as much as you want, and I do. It's just like everyone else. But the thing about big budget movies is they have to work under a under a large microscope that these small films can get away with. Because if you say a line like that in a big budget movie, they'll cancel you. It's like, oh my God, that's so misogynistic. It's so out of character. Is this from the character or the writer? Like, who am I canceling? Am I canceling the movie, the writer, director? I'm canceling someone, And then the fact that there are no prominent female characters in the film. Like, Abe has a wife, it'd be like, oh my God, like, Aaron has a wife. It's like, oh my God, can't you develop the female character? Why are there no female character? Why are there no trans character? Why are there no colored characters? You kind of get into the politics of all these things. And it's just that one comment, just because we're living in such a toxic time where it's just like there's so much extremists and people like are triggered so easily. Even if we're doing reviews now, but even if you search reviews on YouTube and you go by popular reviews, a lot of the more popular reviews aren't even like new movies, old movies. It's just about people either feigning that they're triggered or genuinely being triggered, or just targeting people who want to be triggered, who want to like spite watch movies, or they're just looking for angry stuff. It's like, oh my God, the Little Mermaid is black. Oh my God, like this Snow White is saying all these weird comments, and it's just like, Barbie, let's cancel Barbie. It's like left and right and politics. So just that, even though it's just one comment, it just reminded me of the toxic world we're living in, where it's just like an innocent comment like that, which is kind of jarring, but it's just a comment that you can look past. You can't get away with that nowadays. This movie's what, going on like 18 years old or something?
Yeah. 2004, I think.
2004. Oh, almost 20 years. 19, almost 20 years old. So yeah, it's just amazing how much time has changed since then. But yeah, those are the two things that stuck out to me. But as far as the plot of the movie itself, everything is kind of plodding along, and you do get a little bit more insight on the Aaron character, because it seemed like Abe was kind of the mastermind, because he was the one that kind of went back and explained everything to Aaron. Now you're kind of seeing a shift, and as, wait a minute, is Abe really the leader of these two, or is it Aaron really pulling the strings?
Yeah, it's interesting. So as we move into the next section, there's more trouble brewing. They hang out in a hotel room because they got to kill 6 hours every day. And they talk about the fact that, this is kind of suspicious looking, these two guys checking into a hotel room every day for 6 hours, which is something that occurred to me early on, when he said, oh yeah, I don't want to affect anything, so I'll just check into this hotel room. But people are going to notice this guy's always checking into this hotel room. Like, isn't that in itself something that could come back to haunt them? But anyway, it could be suspicious. And also the storage guy who sees them going into the storage space and never coming out, so there's a trail they're leaving of suspicious behavior here. And then this is where Aaron's cell phone suddenly rings, and a big moment, because what the hell, you brought a cell phone? You're not supposed to do that. There shouldn't be a way for anybody to contact us here. And he says you can't bring it back with you. You got to leave that here. And then later on, I guess after they've gone back, they're going to a restaurant, and the cell phone rings again, and he's like, what the hell? Are you kidding me? And now they sort of think on the fly of, okay, how do cell phones work? Are they both ringing? If there's two identical cell phones? No, that's not how cell phones work. They search and they find the first one, and then they stop searching because they've already found the phone. So, okay, so my phone is ringing here. That means the Double's phone in Russell Field isn't ringing. Are we sure about that? I don't know. but he also comments that we've broken symmetry here, because the Double's phone should be ringing when their phone is, so it again, it's complicated stuff, but you kind of feel that things are kind of getting a little out of hand here. They're going off the rails. And then there's car alarms waking people up in the middle of the night, and the one guy says, we can do the plat punch now. He gets in touch and says, this is the moment to do the plat punch. And the reason being that all we have to do is come home before the car alarms go off, and then we can make sure that that doesn't happen, and then our doubles will never wake up, and so they won't know that they got up in the middle of the night and did this thing. The one guy says, yeah, but they'll be changed. And how can we go back that far if the boxes aren't running? Oh, wait a minute, the boxes are running. He started them up. And so, okay, is this an experiment, or is this really something you're doing to help me? Well, it's both. So this is where, again, I felt like we're going to go off the rails here, because we're going to try this plat punch thing, which seems really ill-advised. It seems like so much can go wrong here. But before they can do that, they notice Thomas Granger's car, Rachel's dad, sitting in his car, and he's following them. And they're like, what the hell's going on? And hey, I saw him earlier today, and he was clean shaven, but now it looks like he's got 2 or 3 days of beard growth. What's going on here? And so he actually phones Thomas Granger at home, and he's there. So this is like a double of Thomas Granger. And they wind up chasing him into an alley, and he's kind of all messed up. He's kind of collapsed. And so they're kind of convinced that he must have used a box somehow, but they don't know, which one, and they don't know how he got onto it. And, he might be in the box now, let's turn him off. They talk about all kinds of things. And then Abe asks Aaron if he was planning to tell Granger about this stuff, and he says, no, what about you? And this is where they have this big moment of, could one of us have told him? And they're trying to figure that out. They're trying to imagine, is there a situation in which we might have told him this? But they can't figure it out. And the voiceover says, the real conversation should have been about what to do with this comatose man that they now have. But instead, they were busy compiling a list. Supplies for 4 days in a box. I guess Abe is compiling the list. And so this is where I think Abe finally realizes, okay, things are like so far off the rails that he's gonna somehow go back 4 days. He's gonna bring enough oxygen, he's gonna bring enough water, he's gonna make sure that everything's okay, and he'll go back 4 days, and then he'll he doesn't say it, but it seems to me that's the implication, that he's going to go back and kind of fix all this before any of it starts. But before that can happen, we see one guy sort of gassing the other guy with a mask, and it's hard to see who's who. And at first I thought maybe it was Abe gassing Aaron, but then I think it's actually Abe gassing his past self, maybe. I'm a little bit confused about that. But he goes back 4 days to prevent the start, theoretically. And so, I don't know, what do you think? What did you think about this moment?
So this is an interesting section of the movie, and this is where you have that classic line in this section. Man, are you hungry? I haven't eaten since later this afternoon. So,
yes, that's a good one.
Yeah, it's a great line. So, interesting part of the movie where a lot more mystery and a lot more questions are brought up. You talk about who's being gassed. You talk about who told Granger about, the machine. The fact that they're more focused on, the machine and, can they trust each other rather than the life of this man, who may be innocent, maybe, who knows, and the fact that they don't even explore it that much makes you realize this movie is more about bringing up questions. And this is the typical part of the movie where one of them would turn on the other, there'd be more of a plot going on. Much like the last psychological sci-fi film we did, Solaris, there is no plot. It's just a premise that's brought up to ask philosophical questions. And again, this movie doesn't have a conventional plot where one turns on the other. One wants to stop this, one wants to keep it going, and you got your good guy, bad guy, you got your antagonist, and then they go at it. So it really makes you realize that even trying to find the answers to some of these questions kind of misses the point of the film, because you can ask them, but if you focus on that, you're not going to get a satisfactory answer, and B, that's not even the goal of the movie to begin with. So it's like, if you pursue this path, it's not going to lead you to anything that's going to be that rewarding. The reward is kind of asking the question, not answering it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the mysteriousness of it all and the creepiness of it all. Like, what happened to this guy? Was he in the box? What was he trying to do?
Mm-hmm.
What's going on there? Like, it's all sort
Yeah.
of creepy and disturbing.
Yeah, we're pretty mature people. We wouldn't say like, it's certain like adult movies. If a guy walks in with a box and you put your hand in it, it can be kind of creepy. But you know, we won't be asking what's in the box like that. Like,
No,
we're more mature than that. So
absolutely, yes. Um, so then, this all funnels down to Abe and Aaron meeting on a bench, and this is kind of where it all started, where uh, Abe is going to tell Aaron, hey, I'm, whatever. But he's gone back and he's tried to change everything, we think. And so he shows up at the bench, and Aaron says, hey, I've been calling you all morning. Really? Um, it seems like things are okay. It seems like he knows nothing. It seems like all he has to do is not say anything. And then Aaron won't know anything about the time travel. But then Aaron suddenly says, I hope you're not implying that any day is whatever it is, a bad day at this company, which is something he said earlier in the movie in response to something that Abe had said. And it's sort of a non sequitur here. It doesn't make sense. And it's like, whoa, what's going on? It's like he's responding to the earlier conversation. And then Abe starts to kind of get sick or faint, and he sort of starts to collapse. And Aaron kind of rushes over to his aid, and we can hear he's been listening to something through an earbud, and it's hanging loose. And we can hear coming out of the earbud is the speech from the beginning of the movie, or the stuff that they said at the beginning of the movie, where he says, I promise to show you something, the most important thing that any living organism has ever witnessed. So basically, in this moment, we realize that Abe has failed to stop himself from telling Aaron the truth, because here he is in a recording telling Aaron the truth. And then from there, Aaron kind of explains how everything has happened, how he did everything. And it's sort of complicated, and it involves finding what do they call it? The backup box, the reserve box.
the failsafe.
Fail safe. There we go. And things like that, and sort of going through it, how he kind of outwitted Abe in a sense. And then the two wind up working together to try and pull off this whole Rachel ex-boyfriend gun thing at the party. And Abe has cold feet about it. He's like, I don't know, and Aaron convinces him that there's no danger. They've gone through it every which way, sort of almost implying a Groundhog Day thing where he's gone so many times and he's tried it so many different ways. And so now they need to basically get this guy sent to jail now before he catches Rachel alone some other time when they won't know about it. So this is kind of their moment to kind of get this guy and put him in jail. So then Abe says, what's wrong with our hands? We can't write like normal people. And again, there's no explanation, but it's like the ear bleeding. There's something going on with their hands. They can't write anymore. So they're being affected by this stuff. So they go ahead with the party, and this is where Abe talks about how many times did Aaron cycle through this until he got it right. And he also says, I can tell you what I did when it was my turn, but that doesn't count. Only the last revision. That's what counts. That's what people remember. And he says, I decided to believe only one more would have done it. I can almost sleep at night if it was only one more. And, you know, he probably saved lives by what he did. So I'm kind of still going, well, what the hell happened here? I don't know what happened. But, you know, it seems like it was more or less okay, whatever happened. But they're not happy with each other and what they've done. And Aaron says, let's go somewhere where we don't speak the language, but we don't have any money, and we'd have to steal our passports. And I guess they mean that their other selves have the passports. So there's like duplicates now. So the other selves are living their lives and have their passports. And we'd have to steal their passports in order to go anywhere. And anyway, Abe is afraid that they're going to build a box. So he plans to stay and kind of keep an eye on them and sabotage them if they try building a box. And then Aaron says, well, why would you stay? It just won't go back far enough, will it? And then he kind of suggests that Aaron should duplicate the family of his wife and child. So there's something weird going on there. It's like, again, maybe going back to, I don't care about Rachel, my girlfriend, but your wife and your daughter. So he's kind of suggesting that maybe he wants duplicates of the wife and daughter because he cares about them. And Abe winds up saying, just go away and don't come back. Don't ever come near them. Don't come near any of them. I haven't shown you what I'm capable of. And then the final thing we see is Aaron in France instructing workers on how to construct what might be a giant box. And we hear Aaron's voice saying, I've told you everything. I've paid my debt to you. You won't hear from me again. And so it kind of ends on this, like, what's going to happen now kind of moment here. Any thoughts?
Yeah, so at this point, we realize there are three Aarons. The Aaron with the earpiece that kind of knew, we kind of realized the first time Abe went back and visited him that he was just pretending that he didn't know what was going on because he had already been through those moments. And the earpiece was just so he could stick to the script, so that Abe wouldn't catch on. So there's the first version of Aaron that we follow throughout the movie. The second version that we realize is actually another version with the earpiece. There's the version that was in the attic when the wife said she heard rats, and then there's a version, the hoodie version, as well, that goes running off and becomes Kang the Conqueror. So we realize there's an extra version of Aaron while there are just still the two versions of Abe as far as we know. So if you don't close off the loop, there can be multiple versions of these characters existing in the same timeline. I remember I was listening to an audiobook of Stephen Hawking talking about time travel and saying that how a lot of these scientists actually would love to talk about time travel, but because they're afraid to be laughed at, they circumvent ways of talking about it. And I think he mentioned in it that two of the same people can't exist at the same time, or they'll explode or something like that. They can't occupy the same space at the same time, or they'll both combust or something to that effect. So I found that interesting. The way they kind of explained two people not being there at the same time was causality. And also you have the stuff with the party that shows there's a little bit of vanity with Aaron, that he wants to be this hero. And he mentioned that they're prescient, which makes sense. Like, they know the answer to the questions before they're even asked. It's like, so I kind of agreed with him when he was trying to convince Abe, what can possibly go wrong? Like, we know what happens,
Yeah.
so let's just do it. They took the bullets out of, or the shells out of the shotgun, and there was no need to finish the scene because we kind of knew how it would play out. They're from the future. They're in the past, but they're from the future, so they know how this whole thing plays out. So a lot of questions brought up at the end of the movie, few answers, but to me, it worked. It worked for me.
Oh yeah, I enjoyed this movie a lot. I thought it was very interesting, very exciting. Even though it's not easy to follow, it's still very intriguing, and I really enjoyed it. And I think I'll, having seen it twice, I feel I know it better than I would have if I'd only seen it once. But I think I'll probably watch it a third time because I think there's still stuff in there that I didn't quite get the first time. I think there's still things to understand and appreciate. So it's a movie definitely worth watching multiple times, I think.
Yeah, I think it's that type of movie. Either you're not into it, or if you are into it, it's something you're going to revisit.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
so I did mention a couple of things throughout this review that I mentioned for a reason. So I did bring up the whole cancel culture thing,
Hmm.
and I did bring up how the female characters weren't that well developed. So to bring that back into a loop, the reason I kind of brought that stuff up is because Shane Carruth does have a checkered past.
Uh-huh.
Yes. So he did his fiance, which was the lead actress in his second film, Upstream Color, I think was the name of it. Amy Simons. Uh, she did allegedly say that he did emotionally, physically, and verbally abuse her throughout their relationship, and she did get a restraining order against him.
Wow.
While he didn't make a lot of films after this, initially he said it was, you have to balance. He seemed realistic with what happened in that he, alluded to the fact that you have to balance between commercialism and artistic um, endeavors, and he was leaning more towards keeping his artistic integrity rather than doing commercial films or being a director for hire. But then in later years, he kind of sounded more bitter and angry at the industry about not getting the opportunities he felt he deserved. So it didn't have the prettiest ending to his career, and um, maybe it kind of explained why the female characters weren't that developed, and there was a little bit of misogyny in the film. And also, it's kind of why I got into the whole cancel culture thing because, if he came back right now with anything, he'd be canceled. And the climate of society in Hollywood, it's very tricky right now, man. It's very tricky. I don't even think Hollywood is as liberal as it makes itself out to be. I think they're a bunch of phonies. I think a lot of them are very conservative because they have a lot of money, and it benefits them to have more conservative views because financially it's more supportive to who they are and where they are. But politically, it's a tough climate, and I don't see anyone giving him money to make a movie, and I don't see the public. And again, the public are all hypocrites too. I mean, we all go online and pretend we're perfect people, and if the spotlight shines on us, we'll see how flawed we really are. We'll scurry like roaches.
Yeah.
But I don't see him having an opportunity in this climate to do anything based on what's happened in his past. So I think this is pretty much it for him. This and Upstream Color, I think is pretty much all you're going to see from him moving forward. You can enjoy these films, but that's pretty much why we're unlikely to see much from him in the future. So I didn't want to have that cloud the review and our discussion, but I felt it was worth mentioning before we wrapped up.
Wow, I did not know any of that. I clearly did not do a deep dive into his background, but yeah, that's surprising to hear. I just I almost commented early on that there's not a lot of women in this movie, and their parts are really tiny. It always surprises me because I came from a background of doing theater, and I learned early on that if you wanted to do theater, if you wanted to write plays and get them produced, you had to write a lot of good parts for women because there were so many women involved in theater. And, so I started out writing plays that had more women than men in them. And I've tried to always have at least a good balance, if not, more women, and I find women interesting. I find those characters interesting. So it just surprises me when I see a movie that's, wow, this is all guys. Why are none of these characters women? But yeah, it didn't occur to me that there was something even darker potentially behind that. Um, and even that misogynist comment that I made reference to, the, oh, stop worrying about Rachel, she kind of brings this on herself, or whatever he says. I just thought that was an interesting character thing. Like, why would this guy be saying that about his own girlfriend? But put into the context of everything else, maybe, yeah, maybe it is a slightly more misogynist thing for him to have included in this movie.
And again, that's me connecting dots. That may have
Mhm.
absolutely nothing to do with what he does in his personal life. But it's speculation. I mean, if you're
Yeah,
abusing women in your personal life and verbally, physically, emotionally, if they have to get a restraining order against you, I think it was from her. She's also an actress, director, writer, just like him, just like him. But I think there was another girlfriend as well that filed a police report against him. So there is a history of this with him.
wow.
It only, you can speculate that it spills over into his creative work. So maybe, well,
Yeah.
maybe it has nothing to do with each other, but either way, it's not good. So
Well, yeah, it certainly raises the question, much like this movie raises a lot of questions. So, yeah, it's definitely something to consider, and that's too bad. It's
yeah,
unfortunate.
it's too bad for him personally, but again, the movie is its own entity, and it's definitely worth watching. Leaving all of that stuff aside,
Yeah,
it's a very good movie, and a lot was done in a budget. I think it may have said 10 grand. I think it may have even less than 10, maybe seven or
yeah,
something. But it was a very
yeah,
low budget film.
yeah. I think it was 7. Yeah, very low budget and very impressive, what they did with that. And it is a good movie. And I am a firm believer that the art should be able to stand on its own, and we should be able to separate the art from the artist. And I mean, let's face it, in the past, we wouldn't have known much about the artists. We wouldn't have had access. There was no internet. We couldn't find out stuff. So we just appreciated art, whatever it was, if it was music, if it was painting, if it was movies, whatever it was. So yeah, I think it's sort of strange to say, I don't know if I like this work of art because what do I know about the guy who made it? It should exist on its own. It shouldn't be connected to, whatever he may have done in his life.
Mhm.
That's what I think.
Yeah, I mean, I still like Roman Polanski film. I still like Woody Allen films. I mean, I still listen. I'm black. I mean, segregation. There's a lot of racists on screen. There's a lot of
Oh yeah,
misogynists on screen, both in front of and behind the camera. So you have to look
yeah,
past that stuff to appreciate the arts.
yeah,
But yeah, overall, great film. I didn't want to sidetrack the review. That's why I saved all this to the end. But definitely worth watching. Definitely enjoyable viewing. Yeah, good time overall. A heady film, interesting film.
yeah. And it's only about 78 minutes, so it's not really hard to watch. It's very easy, and it's worth it. People
Yeah.
should check it out.
Yeah, I wish filmmakers would be more like this filmmaker, I forget his name, but he did movies like Mendigo Sex Addict and Hookers in Revolt, where there were so many female characters on screen, and you really got to see them both inside and out, So
Hmm.
this
Yes,
Sean Weathers guy. So
yes,
yeah,
yeah.
can't
He,
can accuse him of a lot of stuff, but he did definitely put a lot of women on screen.
he
So
did, and I suspect his running times were also not 2.5 hours generally.
no, no,
No,
no, they were
no,
pretty brief, pretty brief.
pretty
So
tight movies. Yeah.
yeah, 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 yeah.